Welcome to the Flynn Brothers podcast. I'm John.
And I'm Jimmy. Today's big ideas: reviewing replay review and basking in basketball heaven.
We debate the merits of replay review in basketball and other sports and wonder if we should do away with it altogether.
Then, after a brief discussion about human fallibility, we talk about the Gauntlet, aka our favorite way to play NBA 2K.
Finally, we're going to give you our top 10 basketball players of all time, according to the aforementioned Gauntlet.
But first, here's the Solons.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, it's a windy day here in Los Angeles. The wind's howling outside, so if you listeners hear any gusts, just know that it's a windy day.
It's not ghosts, it's merely the Santa Ana winds. They just originate from high-pressure, dry masses in the Great Basin, the valley in between the Rocky Mountains and the Sierra Nevada. Nothing to worry about, not ghosts, just pressure and dry and humidity, you know?
Awesome, you know all that without having to Google anything.
Right off the top of my head.
Unbelievable, your vast body of knowledge. All right, well, we're talking about a lot of basketball today. We're going to start with replay review. And got to be honest, replay review has been driving me nuts. We watch a lot of basketball, and I'm kind of at my wit's end with the replay review, particularly at the end of the game. We're getting into this pattern now when you watch a basketball game where replay review is so intrusive that the final, 30 seconds on a game clock can take 15 minutes of real time, or the final 2 minutes of a game can take over a half hour. I mean, what do you think? Is replay review just out of control?
I understand the reasoning for it because the NBA in particular is accused of fixing games or having refs on the take for certain outcomes. But yes, it has reached a level that is unacceptable, quite frankly. It saps the game of its high drama. There's been accusations that the NBA actually doesn't mind this because it draws out the most climactic part of the game where they get the highest ratings and so juice their numbers a bit. But yeah, it just takes away everything that fans want to see. Fans do not want to see three normal-sized men gathered around a TV screen. They want to see gigantic men flying through the air trying to put a basketball through a iron hoop.
And the only, the big thing with the NBA is they keep talking about how much they're struggling with ratings. I mean, this has been something since COVID. It's in a lot of different sports, not really the NFL, but especially in basketball, just how much they are struggling with ratings. And I feel like most casual fans, if you're flipping around and you see a game is in its last 5 minutes, you will watch. So I feel like, for devoted fans, you're going to watch the whole game and you're going to grumble a bit about the replay review. But isn't it kind of just scaring away casual fans? Like, if you were not a huge basketball fan, wouldn't you be upset if every time you turned to a game, it just took forever when it's supposed to be the most exciting part of the game?
Yeah, and I think, too, what also replay review does is focuses really deeply on small details, such as, does the ball graze a guy's fingertips? Is his foot on the three-point line? Is this a block or a charge? Details that are probably the least interesting part of the basketball product instead of the whole thing, the game when it's in flow and in motion. That's what people really love.
I think, too, the referees are an interesting part of this because during replay review, the referees will go on camera and it's a single shot of just the referee in a full close-up, and they will discuss, the Sacramento Kings are challenging this call to see if it meets the criteria for a flagrant foul. Then they'll go back. And then they'll deliberate for what feels like an infinity, but is really at least a minimum of 2 minutes and as much as 5 or 6. And then they'll come back and do this big, dramatic sort of, we have reviewed the play. dramatic pause. And the foul, in fact, dramatic pause, does meet the criteria for a flagrant one. And then they'll like state the rule from the rule book and stuff, and they'll really milk it, and they'll kind of get the crowd involved, which I kind of like somewhat. Like if you're at the event and the ref has this flair for the dramatic, it's kind of fun. But part of me is just like, these refs probably get a little insecure about the fact that, oh, I'm not LeBron James. I'm not a big NBA star. Even though I'm on the floor with these guys, I'm not as popular as them. So this is kind of my moment to shine. Do you think the refs sometimes abuse their power in those moments?
Oh, 100%. Bill Kennedy, I think, is the main offender. He treats it almost as though it's a screen test for something. The angle of the camera is low, so the ref is powerful. Bill Kennedy will do is he'll put his hands on the table like he's Alec Baldwin and Glenn Ross. And I think another thing that people have to keep in mind is that if you are a referee, you have a significant ego. You want to be on national television. You want to be a little bit of a ham, at least. I think they've dialed it back a bit. I mean, you can watch some stuff from the 70s and whatnot when refs are calling charges and they think they're part of the game. They think they're part of the entertainment product. And that has been curtailed a bit. But with the advent of replay review, this door has been opened again for refs to take the spotlight. And I think, yes, they have completely abused this privilege extended to them.
Well, to your point about Bill Kennedy, like all refs are really ripped. Like you have to be in very good shape. So it's like you kind of want to show off that you're ripped. In Bill Kennedy's case, he has a very like distinct mustache. Tony Brothers is another ref with a very distinct mustache. So they are kind of these characters. Like, and Scott Foster's another famous ref. He's got the hard slicked back hair. When we grew up, there were guys like Joey Crawford and Dick Bavetta, really old school refs who, would have loved this era of replay review and being on camera and milking it and stuff. Those were guys who back in the day loved giving the star players a technical foul because, as a ref, you kind of get involved and escalate the game. And it can be very exciting at times. But yeah, to me, there's a cynical part of me where it's just like, this ref is kind of seizing their night in the sun, as it were.
Yeah, and I think actually, to me, one ref who I think has been accused of this showboating ship and has been accused of maybe making things personal with players, most of all, is Scott Foster, particularly in the case of Chris Paul. They have a long-standing rivalry. However, I've noticed, and we watch the Kings, who are a team who don't get any respect from the refs, and Scott Foster seems particularly aggrieved whenever he has to ref a lowly Sacramento Kings game, and he almost makes these calls with disdain, whereas some refs will like really throw their hips into a blocking charge. He'll just kind of like tap his palms to his hips and be like, we're going the other way.
He's just going through the motions. Yeah.
Which is a almost more interesting way to referee a basketball game than going way over the top with the dramatics, particularly when it comes to the replay review. If you just state it sort of matter-of-factly, even if I'm upset with the call that they've decided, I'll be like, all right. But another thing that refs will do with the replay review is they'll potentially like get a call wrong, but they won't admit it.
Yeah.
They'll say, actually, that foul that I called, that wasn't a foul, but there's actually a foul on the other guy, and so the result is the same. So the challenge was successful, but the result is exactly the same. And that is probably the most infuriating aspect of it.
There's almost this like Mean Girls ishness to it, right? Where it's like, oh, I have total power over it. You're playing by my rules. I can change the rules whenever I want because I'm the only one who knows the rules. Like there's almost like this bullying, cliquey, Mean Girls-ness.
Like a terrible teacher administering a quiz where they had like B instead of C, and they're like, but actually B is the correct answer or whatever. Yeah.
Well, what do you think about a few years ago how the NBA made a rule change where coaches now get coaches challenges, sort of like you have in the NFL. The rules are a little more strict in terms of the NBA, what sort of calls you can challenge, what calls you can't challenge. You have to give up a timeout if you give the challenge or if you get the challenge wrong. I do like the coach's challenge. Like, I think it is pretty cool and it can swing the momentum of a game. Sometimes it'll be kind of frivolous and a coach will use it like on the first play of a game, almost like the refs disdainfully if they don't want to ref the Sacramento Kings game. But yeah, I don't know. The coach's challenge, I do like it. But at the same time, it's like we already have issues with replay review and slowing the game down. Is it just another instance of slowing the game down, or do we need it?
It's interesting because it's one of the few things that a coach can tangibly do to alter the outcome of the actual game on the floor. They can change a call around. Doug Christie, recently instated as the Kings coach, trying to sort of make a name for himself, called a challenge literally 14 seconds into the game.
Right.
And he was correct. And it was like, oh, Doug's setting the tone. He's showing the guys that every possession is important. And in a way, that's interesting, but that it's also led to this epidemic of players swirling their fingers in the replay review gesture, and coaches being like, looking back at the bench, it's like, should we challenge it? Should we not? And most of the time, the players are full of it. I mean, every single player has contested every single foul almost throughout all of NBA history, and now you've given them this sort of tool that they can use to challenge it. Whereas it just sort of seems like maybe going deeper into the crevasse, if you will, and allowing for more and more opportunities for replays isn't the answer.
And, we should, as an aside, mention we've mentioned the Sacramento Kings several times here. We are Sacramento born and bred. And so if it seems odd that you're listening to a podcast where guys keep talking about the Sacramento Kings, get used to it. Well, one thing I wonder about replay review is because it takes so long, I ask myself, can we speed it up? And, I know one thing we've talked about when we've watched games is, should there be a designated referee who's the replay review referee? So where you have the 3 refs on the floor and then there's the replay review referee. And if there's ever an issue where coaches want to challenge it or they want to double check like an out of bounds, or is the guy's foot on the line? Is it a 2-pointer or a 3-pointer? They can go to the replay review referee. But I think the one thing we don't like about that is the replay review referee is not on the floor. He's not a part of the action. And I think there's a part of us that distrusts, well, should this guy really have final say if he's not out there running amongst the Lakers and the Timberwolves and the Sacramento Kings? Or should there be a designated person and they are given that authority to make those calls?
I do think it should either be almost eliminated, or you bring in this extra referee. I'm good with this. To me, running up and down the floor doesn't make that much of a difference to me.
You don't think these refs that are making the calls, the men's destinies are on the line? They shouldn't be running up and down the floor, the sweat flying between them, the lights bright. You think they can just be sitting on a chair off to the side? That's what you're telling me? You can look me in the face and tell me that right now?
Are you trying to put refs into the man in the arena? The men reffing the men in the arena? I do think it doesn't matter, particularly for stuff like foot on the line, ball getting tipped out of bounds. That stuff is dealt with so much quicker most times by the play-by-play guy, and the color announcer is usually able to diagnose whatever the foul or problem is much quicker than the replay ref review.
Yeah.
So if you just had one person who was able to say, this is the way it is, but I think the reason it doesn't happen is because there's a lot of ego, as I mentioned, with refs, and particularly in the way that they relate to one another. There's the crew chief, there's the umpire, and there's the referee, these 3 different positions. The crew chief is number 1. And I think the crew chief would bristle at somebody who's sitting on the sidelines, just this video-focused guy overruling some call that they made. I think that's probably the reason. And so instead, there's this arcane bureaucratic process where they send it to Secaucus, New Jersey, where they've got this wall of TVs and there's these men and they've got their headsets and they're all leaning over shoulders and stuff like it's mission control for NASA. And they take so much longer with it too. So to me, it's just this really flawed system.
Well, to take a more macro view of the situation, I think, what is the purpose of replay review? I think basically what it is to ensure that the game is called as accurately, fairly, and objectively as possible. But isn't that impossible when certain rules are essentially interpretable or subjective? Like, I think about a block charge where there are so many instances where it can possibly be called a blocking foul or a charging foul. Are the guy's feet moving? Is he within the semicircle under the basket? There's just all these different criteria for it, and it feels like game to game there's inconsistencies in it, and of course there are inconsistencies in it. It's not a perfectly written rule, and it's changed over time. Like, it's changed over the time of the NBA, right? And even with last year, like, fouls were starting to get called more strictly than they were earlier in the season. So it's like, are we chasing something that is completely impossible but with replay review? Like, are we aiming for perfection where perfection is just impossible?
Yes. Yeah, I think that is
Oh,
exactly
great.
what's happening. To your point, last year they loosened up the fouls
Right.
and they allowed more contact and more physical play, and people like this. But this varies from game to game. There are teams that their defensive strategy is to play physically enough that they're essentially fouling on every possession,
Right.
and referees are unable to call all of these fouls, and eventually the physicality of the game gets to a higher and higher level. Then some teams which are more maybe finesse based and something that would be allowed to slide in a more physical game is called in a more finesse game. And I think it's almost up to the referees who are almost akin to like a conductor of an orchestra, almost, that they are people who set the tone for the game. And I think that allowing them maybe a little bit more of this power and leeway to make these calls would help them if referees were able to stay off of social media. If they were
all the roasting online, you're saying, the memes online.
exactly
I see. Yeah.
the old way where you made a crappy call and you got booed out of the arena, but then it would end it. Maybe you listen to the radio on the way home. You don't have to scroll through mentions of people wishing awful things to happen to you and your loved ones.
No, it's terrible.
So I think that is also another reason, maybe as a form of protection for the referees. But no one's ever really happy with a replay review. No one's happy with the last 2 minutes report.
No. I think replay review can often get it wrong because it'll often be bowing to the letter of the law versus necessarily the spirit of the law. So take like an out of bounds play where it's the red team versus the blue team, and a guy on the red team is holding the ball, and a guy on the blue team slaps it out of the red team guy's hands. And as it's getting slapped out of the red team guy's hands, his very fingertip is the last thing to touch it. And so it ends up being the ball going to the blue team, even though the blue team guy completely slapped it out of his hands out of bounds. So that's something where it's like on any playground, any pickup game in America, if you slap a ball out of bounds, you do not get the ball, no matter if it touched the smallest subatomic particle of the red guy's hand, right? So I think that's something where, and even like you'll see this in football, like with certain catches, where it's like on any schoolyard, any flag football game in America, that is a catch. But there are all these like really, really strict criteria where we have seen incredible highlight plays overturned just because it doesn't match the absolute letter of the law. And that's something where it's like, I would almost rather there be some shenanigans and some subjectivity and just, you know what, that was a hell of a catch. I don't care what the letter of the law says. That counts, baby. Like I part of me craves some of that. Don't you crave that?
Why even have rules then, Jim? Why not just everyone run around? If you want to kick a basketball, go ahead. Pick up a soccer ball and throw it in the goal. That'd be awesome.
Do you think fans complain more about the refs in football or basketball?
I'd say more people watch football,
Right.
but the games are on less frequently. It's probably pretty equal if you tally up all of the complaints. I think the NFL is more derided for their incompetence, perhaps.
Yeah.
But they also get more time to get it right. There are natural stoppages in football which aren't in basketball. So replay review, I don't have as big of a problem with it in the NFL because so much of the product is like replay based.
Yeah, true.
Whereas the NBA, the whole appeal is when things are going crazy and there's no stoppages in play, when teams are trading baskets or they're really struggling to get a basket or they're just going back and forth. When the game's in motion and flow, that's when the NBA is at its best. Whereas football, you only get that maybe in the last 2 minutes sometimes or when it's a really close game. And then it's really even more exciting, but that isn't generally the nature of the game.
Yeah. And to be fair with replay review, there are a few instances in sports where I enjoy it. The robots that do the calls for out of bounds in tennis, I don't mind that, where they do the little cartoon, here's the ball landing on the line and there's the shadow, right?
There's also the audience claps as it grows, this tension, this drama. Yeah.
And similar with baseball, they'll have the robot computer get in the robot computer. I sound like I'm 80 years old, but they'll have the robot computer get in there like for the strike zone. And did this ball, was it technically in the strike zone? Which that brings up a whole other thing. The notion of a strike zone is somewhat subjective, right? I mean, they've automated it somewhat, but I will say, like, I do like those instances of it, those instances of replay review because it builds suspense with the clapping, with the everyone looking up at the screen, seeing what the robot god is going to tell us is true. I think that actually lends itself to the sport and the suspense of the sport, but I just feel like those are very niche examples where we need replay review.
They're super quick, too.
Yes.
That's the difference between the NBA. And I'm with you on tennis. On baseball, I almost sort of like the idea of a vaguely subjective strike zone. Yeah. Maybe this makes me awful, but I was reading these books about like the Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle era Yankees, kind of two different eras, but still, back in those days, basically the American League and the National League would have different ideas of what a strike zone was. And it depended on which umpire it was. So you'd almost have to scout the umpires, and this would add sort of another element of drama to the game. If you know that, like, oh, this umpire, he calls the strike zone big, or this referee, he lets a lot of contact go.
Right.
It kind of adds this extra level of drama. It's almost like, it's not a sunny day. It's going to be raining. Like, it's just this, it's almost like the weather of a game is like a referee.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to run with that. I think we should get rid of replay review altogether. I really think, like, to your point, there is something to embracing subjectivity. And I think back to like even our own past with sports. And, we grew up as Sacramento Kings fans. We grew up in the glory years of the early 2000s Sacramento Kings. Starting lineup, Mike Bibby, Doug Christie, Peja Stojakovic, Chris Webber, Vlade Divac. I know it like the back of my hand, right? But the great thing about that team, they play the Shaq Kobe Lakers in the 2002 Western Conference Finals. There are all these heartbreaking moments, right? Robert Horry's game-winning three. But the biggest sort of screw job of that series was the refereeing in Game 6. And it was reffed partially by the now infamous Tim Donaghy, who, was since indicted by the FBI for fixing games. Good friend of Scott Foster, well worth mentioning. And we love you, Scott. And but no, I think about like, how raw the loss was when we were young, and we went through it when we were young. But now looking back, we are so tortured as a fan base, and so much of that was because the refs screwed us in Game 6 of the Western Conference Finals. There's a very famous inbounds play where the Lakers are inbounding it, and Kobe Bryant is trying to get free of Mike Bibby, and he elbows him in the face, straight in the face. Anyone who had replay review, anyone saw it live, knew it was an offensive foul.
It's a flagrant foul.
It's a flagrant foul. Borderline, you could get ejected depending how sensitive the ref is, right? I don't know. Did Bibby bleed? I kind of forget. I think he drew blood. Kobe's
from his
elbow.
nose.
Yeah, exactly. And so there were instances of that. But then, I feel like by kowtowing to replay review and chasing perfection, we're robbing tortured fan bases of these moments that they can rally around. I mean, how many times have we commiserated with fellow Sacramento Kings fans about, oh, we got screwed, man, we got screwed. It builds culture. It builds camaraderie. Are we, by chasing perfection, are we robbing ourselves of those great moments, of those great drunken discussions at dive bars?
Let me answer your question with a question.
Oh.
Is life fair?
It sure as hell ain't, buddy.
No. And that's something that I think is well worth learning when you're a child through sports as opposed to later in life with something more dire. And to your point, yes, I think the difficulty of swallowing a defeat that, frankly, the Lakers did quite a bit to win, but they were aided by the refs, and the Kings had opportunities to win that they didn't capitalize upon, and perhaps they would have had a few more opportunities if the refs' whistle had gone a couple different ways, but ultimately, the Kings lost.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, Vlade Divac, Scott Pollard, they were called for terrible foul calls in Game 6, whatever. In Game 7, the Kings shot 16 of 30 from the free throw line.
Yeah.
And if you shoot 16 of 30 from the free throw line in a Game 7, you don't deserve to go to the NBA Finals.
Exactly. And I think part of it, too, to your point, it is a thing that can bring people together. I think Sacramento fans feel more kinship with each other over the loss than we would have felt over the championship. That might be crazy to say.
Maybe. It's the dark and the light timeline. Who knows? Who knows? But I think to your point about life not being fair, this is just a trend in sports in general. I think these sort of glory franchises get the good calls. The Lakers historically have always had a huge foul disparity. They always get the most foul calls in the NBA. You see it a lot the past few years with the Kansas City Chiefs. Such a dominant team. Our producer, Will, he's a big fan of the Philadelphia Eagles. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention how the Eagles got screwed in the, in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. Bad holding call, a couple other bad whistles. But I think part of that is, like, to your point about life not being fair, it's this human nature thing where it's like, we want the strong to conquer. We want the big, strong teams to win. And I think sometimes the refs can fall victim to that, and you maybe even have confirmation bias and blow the whistle in the favor of those strong teams.
You're given the benefit of the doubt to the champion.
Yeah.
That's what just happens. And I think if you earn it and you fight your way through the slogs and the slings and the arrows and you finally reach the mountaintop, you deserve a few of the peripheral benefits that come with that. If you're one of the highest earning people or the people who draws the most eyeballs to the league, yeah, maybe the league is going to think, well, did he really commit that violation? I'm not sure. Maybe we should tweak things this way or that way. And I don't think it necessarily happens consciously. I don't think that there's a directive from either commissioner and, Goodell, Silver, whoever you want to say. Man, Freddie's still baseball's guy, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But this doesn't come down from on high. It's just sort of internalized. And it's not something that I think is necessarily an issue. It's the way life works. Rich people don't pay as much taxes. And
Right.
champions get better calls.
Another thing I think would be cool about getting rid of replay review is it would change your experience watching the game at home versus at the stadium, because you at home would have quote unquote replay review by nature of you're watching it on TV and you get the different camera angles, right? So you at home would know the right calls, but if you're at the arena, you would just see them make the wrong call and it would drive you nuts. Maybe they'd occasionally show it on the Jumbotron, which would just drive you even crazier. So I think that could be kind of cool too. It's like, oh man, you should have been at the game. Like you would have seen. It's like, oh dude, I was at TV. I saw the right angle. You totally got screwed, right?
Here's something that we've lost from the replay review. Something I loved. The makeup call.
Yes.
The
Oh,
makeup,
the makeup
call.
call. Oh.
It's so much better than spending 3 minutes doing a replay review. How many times have we seen an illegal screen get called in the NBA, and on the very next possession, the team that got that whistle gets another illegal screen
Yep.
call? And then now everybody knows you better set your feet and set the screen right. You are not allowed to move or body check a guy or shuffle or spread your legs or anything like that. And then the tone is set for the rest of the game. And, you lose a couple of possessions, but things keep rolling. And I think that is something that we should bring back.
Another thing, I really don't like how, you mentioned the last 2-minute report and how, for those who don't know, the last 2-minute report is basically the night or the day after an NBA game. The ref association, the NBA, will put out this report where they review the last 2 minutes of a game and they will basically interview the ref about why they made certain calls and if they got certain calls wrong. And part of me it's so just like emasculating and just like, geez, I guess I did get that traveling call. I missed that. And I called a foul when it really wasn't a foul. And I just kind of hate, like, the refs are already emasculated in so many ways on the court. I mean, they're the shortest guys out there. Like the players are just yelling and swearing at them all the time. Do we really need them to kowtow, tail tucked between their legs? Geez, sorry, I screwed up. It's like, why don't, it's like, you see the players, yeah, I missed 10 shots last night. I'm really sorry. Geez. No, they're like, I had a bad night. It happens, right? They don't kowtow. Why do we make the refs do this in the last 2-minute report? I kind of hate it, don't you?
Yeah, because they're the arbiters of objectivity and everybody sees it. So when there's something wrong, they're going to get asked about it. But there is a lack of understanding for the referees that we extend to athletes who miss shots. We do not extend the same courtesy to referees who miss calls. They are expected to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. And that is, I think, what we dislike is the reminder that human beings are imperfect.
In sum, life's not fair. Stop chasing perfection. All right, we're going to step aside. We'll be right back. We're back. So, coming back, I think, what we don't like about replay review is that it acknowledges human fallibility. Refs do not always make the right call. They are not robots, right? I think there's some statistic that 90% or so. 90 to 93% of calls are accurate in the NBA, which it's like, you know, for a human being, that's pretty freaking great.
But I would even guess that it's higher.
Yeah, it could be in some instances, some depending on the game for sure. But it's just unfair, I think, as fans, that we always want sports to be perfect. We always want our team to win. We always want players to avoid injury. We always want every single play to be executed perfectly. And it's just not a reality.
At all. These are professionals, people who do it as good as anybody else. But I mean, here I go equating myself to a professional athlete, probably a recurring theme for this podcast.
Sure.
When I play pickup basketball, I'm screwing up all the time. If there was somebody watching me play pickup basketball and I'm throwing terrible turnovers, misadvised shots that are going a foot left of the rim, they would be screaming at me. And meanwhile, I'm getting like furious at DeMar DeRozan for not making a hard closeout against the Miami Heat in double overtime, and he's on a back-to-back.
I think, well, part of this is like with the human fallibility aspect, you talk about like the NBA All-Star Game, which has been a problem for years. And part of the issue is we as fans want to see these guys giving it 110% on every single play. And it's just not something that is always realistic. I think it's just like a little unfair of us to want that in an all-star game.
In theory, though, it should be the perfect game. We have collected the best coaches, the best players, and it's a one-time exhibition of their talents. We should see the game played at the highest level. But what you realize is that effort is such a huge part. Yeah. If talent isn't paired with effort, then all you get are these layup lines. You could maybe see a guy shoot a 40-foot shot and sink it, and that's pretty cool. Or you'll see LeBron, catch an alley-oop off a bounce pass from Steph Curry, and that's sweet. But what you really want is the drama. You want to see the sharpest steel against the sharpest steel.
And part of what we're missing probably is a Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, a maniacal competitor who juices everyone up and pushes everyone. And I think at this current juncture in the NBA, we don't really have the guy who has that maniacal competitiveness and can back it up and has such gravitas that he can motivate the 24 total all-stars into giving it their all and really proving who is the alpha dog.
You're so right. And I think about like The Last Dance, right, where Jordan is playing gambling games with his security guards. They're flipping quarters and he's betting $50 on it. I don't know how many guys in the league there are nowadays where there's those anecdotes where it's like they had to win at everything. Like Michael Jordan would force guys to continue playing poker with him until he had won their money. If he lost a round of golf, they're doing 18 more holes. Like I don't know that there is a guy like this in the league now. Not to say that guys aren't competitive, but we are lacking the true deranged psychopaths that we built this league upon.
And because of this, now for like the 2025 All-Star Game, they've set up this sort of tournament style. I don't even really know the rules. It's just not a traditional game, but it's basically like tournament bracket style, and these smaller teams play each other and then advance rounds. And it's all just because like there's all these reasons the All-Star Game is no good and they're really desperate. And I think, there's a few reasons why the All-Star Game isn't that good. One is the players are tired. It's midway through a very long season, 82 games. I think there's a business side to this where the All-Star Game is where all the league sponsors converge. So players have all these interviews. They have to do commercials, appearances, all this stuff. And the game ends up just becoming secondary or tertiary to all this other BS, right? You'll hear players say, heck, I'd play basketball for free. I just get paid to deal with the other stuff, right? So I think the All-Star Game is just so much of that other stuff. It just kind of dampens the basketball.
Yeah, you're not allowed to do your typical routine that you do before a game. You're coming from the Panera Bread basketball experience where you're dunking, I don't know, loaves into soup. I'm a little over my skis
No,
here.
I've seen that.
But yeah, it's not so little about All-Star Weekend is about basketball, and then they're like, all right, basketball players, basketball time. Here's 30 minutes to warm up. Okay, and then we're going to play a half of the game. You're only going to get maybe like 5 minutes of a time. You're not going to be in your typical rotations. You're not going to be playing with your typical people. Your opponents are completely different, and they're the best.
Yeah.
And then, by the way, there's going to be a really long halftime show, and we actually changed the scoring system. And like last year, it's like, we're going to actually humiliate you on national television by having guys get drafted as well.
God,
So that
yeah.
whole thing, I think, takes a lot of the juice out of it. And I think, too, it's like we are substitute teachers and have seen sometimes when you ask people to participate in something that is compulsory, you are often not getting the most energy and enthusiasm for it. And when something lacks energy and enthusiasm, it stinks to watch.
You want willingness. You want
Yeah.
willing participants. You don't want to hold guns to these guys' heads and say, perform or else, right? Well, I think a big part of this is the players are afraid to get injured, which is understandable. I think that's why the NFL doesn't do the Pro Bowl anymore. They do what are called the Pro Bowl games. So they have, instead of a full contact game, it's a flag football game, and they have skills challenges and longest, field goal kick, stuff like that, which is cool. I don't mind that.
But theoretically, that should be something like, I feel like there's the same sort of risk of injury playing a flag football game as there is playing a basketball game, particularly if it's NFL players playing it at a high level. I mean, certainly there is some contact, and I guess probably more contact, obviously, in the NBA, but not even necessarily giving it 100%. And I watched like one of those flag football games. Guys, what you need to do is get guys into the flow state that they usually get into when they're playing a game, instead of them being like, I'm kind of playing a game, and here I am, and I just missed the dunk. Oh, who cares? This game doesn't really matter. As opposed to you're just like a kid again at recess, and you just want to make the basket because that is the thrill of being out there.
But fear of injury has kept some NBA players out of the dunk contest. I mean, they just, the risk of injury is probably pretty minimal, but it involves a lot of athleticism, and you could land wrong or you could launch wrong or whatever. And
after being ice cold as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's so much, you mentioned not having your routine and whatnot. I think that is totally a part of this, where players just, the fear of injury, the fear of fear itself, as FDR would say, is what is keeping them out of it. God
I don't think that was FDR's quote.
FDR was rolling in his grave thinking about how these NBA players are treating the All-Star game. But, ultimately, most of these players just don't even really care about the results of the All-Star game. It's not going to really cement your legacy. I think at one point in time, and I think still, if you look at NBA players' resumes, all the great ones have won All-Star game MVP, at least those who are playing in the era of the All-Star game. And it is a notch in your belt of, I was the top dog amongst all the top dogs.
Yes.
It is good. Pretty much every great player in the All-Star era has that trophy. And so, but again, it's not so tantalizing as an NBA championship or an MVP award or an All-NBA selection or even an in-season tournament, NBA Cup trophy. So, yeah, it's just really hard to motivate these guys.
I think the guys at the top of the league, too, aren't psychos in the way that Kobe and Jordan were. You have LeBron, who is known for even taking playoff games somewhat off as a feel-out game, a master of pacing himself.
Right.
You have Steph Curry, who isn't really capable of bringing that sort of defensive intensity, which is the main thing I think that's missing from the All-Star game. Guys are playing offense well, but it's the defensive intensity that isn't there. And Steph, if he isn't making his threes, then it's like, yikes. But when he is making his threes, it's awesome. And then I think guys are even willing to be like, they're almost in awe of Steph when he's jacking them. And that can lead to a looseness that we don't like in the All-Star game.
Well, even the new era of superstars, you take Nikola Jokic, who's probably the best living basketball player in the world. He cares more about horse racing than basketball, right? He would love our first episode. Right? Yeah. He would love all we talk about Santa Anita and the horse racing. He'd love that shit. He wouldn't care about this. But yeah, he's like a pretty apathetic superstar. I think you found a Anthony Edwards quote about the All-Star game, and just even he, like someone who is seen as super, super competitive, even he kind of has felt this lack of competitiveness.
Yeah, Anthony Edwards thinks he would outrun track stars in the Olympics. And his quote on it is, I don't know what they could do to make it more competitive. I think everybody looks at it as a break. So I don't think nobody wants to come here and compete. So the double negative aside, everyone knows what he's talking about. What Anthony Edwards is basically getting at is the All-Star break is a break. And it's supposed to be an honor to be an all-star, and guys still want to be named all-stars. They just don't want to participate in the game. And I think also the other aspect of this is that the NBA is at such a comfortable position that even as ratings have gone down, the most recent contract that they signed with their broadcast partners is lucrative, higher than it was, maybe not even commensurate with the ratings. The league is in such a good place that I think guys have forgotten the All-Star game used to be the only time when an American audience would get to see a player who played across the country that they'd only ever read about in the newspaper. Or it was this showcase for talent that would allow the league to gain a grander foothold in American culture. Now it's so entrenched and guys are so omnipresent on YouTube highlights and social media that there's almost like, well, what is the reason for the All-Star game? And I think guys are also less invested in the league as a whole. Like Magic and Bird totally were invested in the league as a whole. Jordan understood his role as the face of a league and the guy who's going to take it to this next level. But guys now just accept that the NBA is always going to be around. They're always going to make money. And they're not as much invested in, I have to make the league better. It's more, I have to make my own brand, this corporation of which I am the CEO, as maximally profitable. And the way that you do that is not by trying hard in the All-Star game. It's by winning championships and playing in games that matter. So if you get injured in the All-Star game, you're making a foolish investment.
And really what fans want is to see the best players alive going at it, steal against steal. So what if we could have this dream of dreams?
I'm intrigued. Go on.
What if we could have a better All-Star game? One with no injuries. One with plenty of rest. No mental fatigue or lack of dowg. Players not as they are, but at the peak of their powers. Not thrown together by conference, but assembled with care to highlight their talents. Not contained or constrained by time, but able to draw the best talent from all eras. And I'm not just talking about one game. I am talking about a tournament. No, not a tournament. A gauntlet. And not just a gauntlet. I'm talking the Gauntlet, which is our version of basketball heaven. John, I think it's time we tell the public about our secret obsession, the Gauntlet.
Yes. Yes. It's a little bit humiliating to admit how much time my brother and I have crafted tailored teams from the greats of all eras. Let's break down what the Gauntlet is.
Sure. So during COVID, we had an ample amount of time. So we were playing a lot of NBA 2K, which is, one of our favorite game series. I would say we've been playing it since NBA 2K2. It's over 20 years now we've been playing NBA
we
2K.
Started playing on Nintendo GameCubes
and
with pizza fingers at sleepovers.
Pizza fingers. Well, hungry now. But so we're playing tons of 2K, and we've kind of grown frustrated with where 2K has gone. This new generation of gamers, they love microtransactions, and they love little coins, and they love trading cards and all this stuff. So 2K is very much tailored to that sort of stuff. A lot of people play online. We don't like to play online. Really, what we've always enjoyed is what is called franchise mode. So franchise mode is you get to create your own team. And we would often pick a modern team like the Sacramento Kings, and you can trade, certain players away and try to get LeBron James on your team or sign Kevin Durant in the offseason. It's kind of for anyone who's ever dreamed of being the general manager of a team, it's basketball heaven. And we found this really, really cool way of doing it where we didn't just do modern teams. We figured, NBA 2K, they have all these kind of old school teams. So they have like the 1986 Celtics with Larry Bird and Kevin McHale and Robert Parrish, Dennis Johnson. They have the 2018 Warriors with Curry and Durant, Klay Thompson, Draymond. They have
the 96 Bulls with Jordan and Pippen and Rodman.
And we discovered that you could do a draft of all these great players from Bill Russell to Anthony Edwards, and you could choose them at the absolute height of their powers because some of these teams have duplicate players. You could choose them at the height of their powers and do a draft. And so this is what we were obsessively doing, running simulation through simulation through simulation, all these drafts of picking great players. So we would have teams, your starting lineup could have Jerry West and Tracy McGrady and Dwight Howard, or another team could have Nikola Jokic, James Harden, Gilbert Arenas. You could have a team with Larry Bird, Bill Walton, and Russell Westbrook. It was just, for basketball nerds like us, it was absolute heaven. And this is something we have spent days of our lives, not the soap opera, but we have spent days of our lives doing this. And it's really awesome. I think for us, it scratches the itch of basketball being fallible, because in this world, it is absolutely perfect. It is a sandbox, and we are the god toddlers in the sandbox, right?
It is as perfect as basketball can be. And I think the other thing that we particularly enjoy about it, and anyone who really loves basketball is obsessed with the team dynamic, the chemistry, the way that pieces fit together. There's been countless examples of teams that have been loaded with talent, but for whatever reason don't succeed because there's a lack of cohesion, a lack of chemistry. The parts don't fit together very well. And that is the challenge of the Gauntlet. All of the other teams that you are drafting against by a robot are constructed of all of the other greatest players of all time. So you have to use your human savvy to outsmart the robot, the AI, and create a team where the players fit together, where you have an ample balance of defense and shooting and playmaking and highlight factor and dynamism and all of these different things that make a great team. And you have to make sure that it all fits together in harmony.
And we like playing what is called couch co-op. Couch co-op or local co-op. We play together. We used to play against each other. However, as brothers, things would get so competitive between us, we kind of just vowed to stop keeping score and to stop going against each other. We used to play one-on-one basketball, and that was one of our rules. We had to stop keeping score. Essentially, our games would go thusly. I, Jimmy, a bigger man, would use my size and girth to back John down in the post and score that way. John, using his speed and savvy, would zip around me. Both styles would frustrate each other until it sort of just ended in an all-out brawl.
It would devolve into, it would start with trash talking. That would be sort of friendly at first, but then grow personal and mean. There would be a pall cast over the proceedings. We would get upset with each other. Eventually, being brothers and having a love for each other, you start to feel bad when you're really just, if you're eviscerating your brother, you've gotten a few lucky shots to go in, you can see them having a bad time. It's like, well, this isn't what we came out here to do.
No, I didn't come out here to hard foul you on a take to the basket, right?
To undercut you on a putback. So we decided that it's better for us to work together, hence this podcast.
So there you go.
We're not competing against each other.
No,
we don't have dueling podcasts. We have one.
It's a collaboration. So that's how we decided we like to play video games. So it's really cool when we play on the same team, because one guy can bring up the ball, the other guy can set him a screen, the other guy can flash open for a pass, you can do a give and go. And it really, like, as someone who played video games, sports video games as single player for so much, I think as we both, as I grew older and we started playing together, it just became a lot more fun, and it's just a lot more enjoyable. And frankly, I don't like playing online. People who play online just play a lot more video games than we do. We don't play a ton of video games, and it's like, I don't want to log into Fortnite and, immediately get killed by some 10-year-old, halfway across the world. That's not cool for me, and then I think there's part of us who, we root for humanity, so we don't mind, giving AI a little kick in the proverbial tush.
I'd also say that my brother and I don't put the difficulty on very high. We usually blow out these other teams.
Right. We don't play video games to get really stressed out and, oh God, I had to play that level so many times over and over again just to beat it, but the thrill of doing it, no. We want to just kick back and do a pick and pop. We want to flash off a screen, catch and shoot. We
alley-oops. We're trying to win 80-40.
Yeah, that's kind of the sweet spot. We kind of like keeping the team under 40, us giving above 80. That's sort of the sweet spot. But it is one of the things that's so hilarious about this is, you'll pick the team that you are, and then you'll pick all these teams from history. So you'll see these just absolute abominations like Kobe Bryant in a Wizards jersey or Tim Duncan in a Sacramento Kings jersey, and it's just sort of an abomination, isn't it? Like, these guys who are associated with one franchise, and you got them in these other colors. It's just like one weird part of the game that we found.
Yes, yeah, it's strange to see. It's a weird alternate universe that you're almost glad didn't come to pass.
But it's awesome just seeing all these guys play together, because when you talk about the greatest players of all time, there's always a lean toward the modern, or if you're older, the era you lived through. But really, the best players of all time, it's just they were the guys who stood out amongst their peers. Yeah, Steph Curry's probably better than Bob Cousy, but both were the point guards who stood out above their peers during their respective eras. So it's really cool to just embrace all the different eras and play with them all together. And we have found through our many simulations that there are a few things that make a great Gauntlet team. And the biggest thing you need is size. I would say that is the number one thing you need. The NBA historically has just been so big, so you can't go into the Gauntlet and roll out a small ball center, a 6'9" center. It just ain't gonna work going against 7'2" Artis Gilmore and
Shaquille O'Neal is going to eat that guy for lunch. You can't have Wes Unseld out there. Much love to Wes Unseld, but he's just not going to last. And if you're a tiny point guard, you're going to get eaten alive by Magic Johnson. You want to be big. Basketball is a sport about size. I think size is also an attribute that transcends sports video games, at least in like football as well. It's always nice to have a gigantic receiver to just loft up a ball to in Madden.
Absolutely. Number 2, I think you need great defense. To quote the great Pat Riley, defense wins championships. You need shooting. Absolutely need shooting. That's kind of the modern touch where it's like you absolutely need 3 points.
Yeah, 3 is more than 2.
Yeah, and then you need the last thing you need is a grunt work 5th starter. So you can have a starting lineup with 4 guys who can score the ball, but you can't have. There's only one ball. You can't have all 5 guys trying to score. So you need a grunt work 5th starter. Sort of the prototype is an Andre Kirilenko, sort of a guy who's all length and steals and blocks. Doesn't mind that he only gets 1 shot the whole game, right? That's something we found is in any great team, you need a grunt work.
He's going to end up with 2 points, 3 assists, 4 rebounds, and a block. And a plus 35.
Yeah. And in terms of defense, it's really fun, too, because one of us will sort of play on ball and then the other will be down in the paint, sort of a roving goalie, right? So one of us will be the point guard guarding, and then we'll usually have a big man down low, like a Wembanyama or a Shaq or, some absolute goalie, and just be pancake blocking any attempt. But, I will say, as close to perfection as the Gauntlet is, there is some fallibility. And I think there's a few players that struggle to translate. Players we love from NBA history. Dennis Rodman doesn't really translate.
You can't put into a video game his indomitable desire to get a rebound.
No.
It just doesn't translate. If you have a person with limited physical gifts who got by on their smarts and their intelligence, it's gonna not quite get across.
Isaiah Thomas, Zeke, undersized point guard in his day, tenaciously competitive, unbelievable defender, great distributor, but never a guy who was a huge scorer. Doesn't really translate. And then a lot of wing players like Dr. J, Julius Erving, Paul Pierce, Carmelo Anthony, guys who were great in an isolation or at times were really athletic and could just score the ball. It just doesn't really translate.
Also, you're a slave to the animation that the computer has given you for their jump shot. Right. So Carmelo and Paul Pierce have unorthodox jump shots. Paul Pierce's takes forever, whereas he was able to easily get it off during his playing year. Guys are swatting that junk out of there quite easily.
But on that note about these players, we're going to come back and we're going to give you our top 10 Gauntlet GOATs, the best players according to the Gauntlet. Hint, hint, it's not going to reflect reality. And we're back. All right, our game to end this episode, we are going to do a game about video games. We're going to give you our top 10 GOATs, greatest of all time, from the Gauntlet. So these are going to be our best basketball players of all time according to NBA 2K. So will there be some reflection of reality? Yeah, but there's going to be a video game tilt to this. And it's going to be curious just to compare reality to the reality of video games.
Yeah, I think that part of it is who do you like playing with in this video game? Who are the most versatile players that contribute to winning? There's also this element of the Gauntlet where it is modern basketball, but I'd say there's maybe a little bit more like post play than probably you see in the typical NBA. That this style of basketball that exists in the Gauntlet, I think, is closer to what at least us as fans are hoping to see. And so these guys are players who transcend eras. Their skills are versatile. They're complete players for the most part, and you could win a championship of championships with this team.
So these players are guys you would pick, you'd build a team around, and like you said, win the Gauntlet. So before we get into our top 10, here are some honorable mentions. An overall 95 rating out of 100 is Bill Walton, the great Bill Walton. So his overall rating is taken from his championship run with the Blazers year after when he was MVP. Bill Walton was one of the greats, unbelievably gifted center, great passer, great rebounder, great shot blocker, played basketball the right way, meaning he got his teammates involved.
Excellent passer. Yeah, I think the thing that's beautiful about Bill Walton in a video game is he was so tragically undercut by injuries to his feet, which just robbed him of his abilities. And in 2K, Bill Walton is always in 1977, where he's perfectly healthy and ready to rock.
And we do a lot of him at the high post, throw it in with the point guard, run to the basket, give and go. Easy money. Take that, computer. Another honorable mention, the great Magic Johnson, a 99 overall. Magic's awesome. He's a great passer in the game. He's huge, but the shot animation, he just can't really shoot. He wasn't the best shooter in his day, and he just is a little limited in his lack of shooting, I would say.
Yeah, and his defense isn't the best.
Yeah, a bit of a hunk of Swiss cheese on the defensive end.
Difficult to make like the no-look passes that you
yeah.
associate with Magic Johnson. He becomes more mortal in a video game.
Doesn't always translate. A guy who we've been playing with since 2002 NBA 2K2 is Allen Iverson. He's a 96 overall. AI's great, can get to the rack, great jumper, but just too small, unfortunately, for the Gauntlet. Again, we mentioned the Gauntlet. You need size. You need size, right?
Iverson's getting taken into the post by mismatches, but he's so fast, which is awesome, and he can juke around anybody.
Another honorable mention, KG, Kevin Garnett, 97 overall. Unreal on the defensive end. Great to pick and pop with for long twos. You kind of wish, if he played in the modern NBA, he would have developed more of a three-point shot. He was the master of the long two.
His heels would be on the three-point line.
It's you go back and watch like the Celtics run, and it's like a 21.5 footer, right? And you know, he though is just such the competitiveness you can almost feel flowing through the screen. But yeah, KG's another honorable mention.
Right. But whereas this is a positive for some players who maybe lack that dog in them, KG perhaps the top dog of all dogs. You can't see that in a video game. KG's brain is not in this simulation of himself.
Another honorable mention, KD, Kevin Durant, 97 overall, unbelievable shooter. Some say, and I would probably agree with this statement, greatest scoring forward of all time. I think that's a fair assessment. Talking real life, not and in the video game, perhaps, maybe. But yeah, really good. Not the defense and his length, just kind of he's not able to use somewhat in real life at times, but definitely in the video game, he just doesn't really translate defensively and can't do a ton outside of sort of just pick and pop or isolation shooting.
Yeah, the handles that he's known for at his size aren't. It's just difficult to really get that in a video game.
Shaquille O'Neal, 98 overall, killer on the defensive end. We love throwing alley-oops to him, but he's just a little slow. It's like a cannon on a battlefield. You need the time to roll it into place and set up your shot, but sometimes you don't always have the luxury of time on a battlefield.
Obviously, also terrible at free throws.
And the final three, Wilt Chamberlain, Hakeem Olajuwon, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They're all 99s, but unfortunately, they just don't translate. They all have certain attributes. You know, their size is great, but, you know, Kareem, you can't really do the sky hook in the video game. Wilt used to do kind of that Big Dipper finger roll where you basically just reach over whatever 6'4" white guy center was guarding him and just roll it into the basket. And then Hakeem, you can't really do the dream shake, which was, you know, his incredible footwork by the basket where, you know, he would work in the low post, hit you with a fadeaway jumper, hit you with an up and under drop step. And just none of these things really translate. Even though they're 99 overall, you can't win a gauntlet with them.
2K struggles to bring agility to big men. That is something that is difficult for them, I think, too. All of Kareem, and Wilt, Kareem, Hakeem, and Wilt are far more plodding than their real-life counterparts were.
All right, the top 10 NBA 2K players of all time if you want to win a gauntlet. Number 10, 98 overall rating, the great Bill Russell. Bill Russell, of course, known for his 11 championships he won with the Celtics in the 50s and 60s. He's not incredible offensively, but my God, on defense, he is an absolute goalie at the rim. He is an absolute goalie. And the thing they say about Bill Russell is, you know, he only averaged about 18 points a game. He was an incredible scorer, never really shot outside of a few feet from the basket. But everyone who played with him, everyone who played against him talks about his competitiveness, and he was just a winner. The guy literally would vomit before games because he just would get so pent up, so nervous. He wanted it so bad. He would say the night before a game, he would dream about the game and think about every single move, every single counter move. And it's just somehow they were the 2K creators, God bless them. They were able to distill that basketball genius into the animation of Bill Russell.
What Bill Russell also said was that he would survey his teammates and notice their skills, and then he would just fill in all the gaps where they were weak. And that is exactly what he does in 2K, and that is what you want if you're going to start a cornerstone franchise, the cornerstone of your franchise in the Gauntlet.
All right, this one's going to be controversial for sure. The 9th greatest basketball player of all time, 95 overall, lowest overall of the top 10, Tracy McGrady. So we were guys who grew up in the Tracy McGrady era. It's a little difficult to explain. I mean, you can watch all the highlight videos online, with the fire emojis. Tracy McGrady was a problem, 13 points and however, 10 seconds or whatever it is. 30 seconds, who cares?
Yeah,
but he just in 2K is unbelievable.
He can do it all. He could be your point guard. He could be your shooting guard. He can score from inside. He scores in transition. He scores when there's guys on him. He scores from three. He skies to the basket for alley-oops. He lays in difficult layups. He can just score. And really, if you're going to get a player in 2K for the Gauntlet, they must score.
Yep.
It is very difficult to get a player who offers very little on the offensive end, and also you really want someone who you can just pour in points with. You can routinely score 30 points with Tracy McGrady in a 20-minute game.
Absolute cheat code. Take Tracy McGrady along the baseline. He will go around his defender because with his speed and agility and just lay it up. You could score every single point with your team that way. All right, number 8, 97 overall. Nikola Jokic is number 8. Sort of just a slightly better Bill Walton. Not as good on defense, but unbelievable passer. The other advantage he has over Walton is he has the 3-point shot. I mean, he already, like in real life, is he already probably a top 20 all time?
Yeah, I'd say so, especially, I mean, he's just been the best player in the league for like the last 5 years.
He's got 3 MVPs. He's probably going to win a 4th.
Yeah.
He's already won a title, was finals MVP. He'll probably win another, I would guess, by the time his career's over.
Just one of the most well-rounded offensive players of all
yeah.
time, and humongous. So even if he isn't the best defender, he's just in the way.
At number 7, 98 overall, Steph Curry. You mentioned pouring in points. Steph pours in points. There are, like you said, we play 20-minute games. There are times we can score 30 points and everyone else is going to get their licks in. And Steph is just incredible. Similar to in real life, he is probably the number 1 player all time who, like a video game, when he gets on a hot streak and he's got fire shooting out of the fingertips and he has the momentum, those heat check threes, there's no one better in the history of the game. There's nobody better than him. Like, no one has been able to distill momentum and use it to their advantage in the history of the NBA better than Steph Curry.
Absolutely. When he's shimmying around the court, when the Oracle or
Chase Center
crowd is pouring adrenaline into him, he's unlike anybody else. And also, I think the other thing that has happened with Steph later is he's gotten huge. He's gotten much larger. He's jacked now, which helps, obviously, in a video game where size is such a big component. Obviously helps a lot in real life as well. And, he's the greatest shooter of all time. That's why he's number 7 on the list.
Steph, I don't know that he's 7 all time. Definitely top 15, maybe being conservative. He's probably somewhere between.
He's close to being in the top 10.
Yeah,
certainly.
for sure.
I think
Kinda right around
the
there.
22 title really elevated him to a higher level
yeah.
and subsequently brought Durant down, sadly.
Number 6, 98 overall, the big fundamental Tim Duncan. Not the sexiest 2K player, not the sexiest real-life player. Like Russell, an absolute winner. This is probably the closest we're going to get to someone more or less being where they are in their real-life list. I would say Duncan's probably top 10 all-time, greatest power forward of all time, 5 titles. Yeah, he's incredible in the game. On defense, on offense, can pick and pop, unreal post moves, absolute goalie. That's kind of the go-to description of these. That's how we use them, these block artists.
He's like Russell. He's a similarly consummate winner who fills in all the gaps of your team, and you could just easily put almost any collection of talent around him, and he's going to elevate it.
Number 5, the Greek Freak, 97 overall, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Basically just a faster Tim Duncan, does all the same things, can block, can score from anywhere.
But has the overpowering ability of Shaquille O'Neal.
Yes, yeah. That is something you really noticed with Giannis when he finally elevated to superstar status. It's basically Orlando Shaq, but even more mobile.
And longer.
Yeah, he really is something. And it's tough that he's dealt with injuries because he again, like Jokic, he's probably in the top 20 now. He is really, really incredible. And
I think he's been, well, top 20, yes, perhaps, but we definitely thought he was going to completely take over the league when they won the finals over the Phoenix Suns, and he's just been sort of hamstrung by inopportune injuries and also an aging supporting cast that just hasn't been able to allow him to do what he wants to do. But in terms of a guy who has that will to win, who would be maybe the psychopath that the league needs to bring the All-Star game back, Giannis is maybe the best person for it, but he also has a very fun-loving personality that I think gets in the way of the psychopath tendencies at All-Star Weekend.
Fair enough. Number 4, 99 overall, Larry Legend, Larry Bird. He's incredible in 2K. You gotta learn to tame the beast, though. He's got a really funky jump shot. You can do a lot of fadeaway stuff is just a guarantee. A lot of the threes, if you're open, are guaranteed. He takes a little while to get the jumper up, which he was just a lot quicker in real life. It's sometimes frustrating in a video game where it's like, come on, man, he shot way faster this. And then you'll have a player like Steph where it's like, man, Steph shoots fast in real life, but this is ridiculous. You're basically grazing the button and he's already released it. But yeah, Larry Bird's unbelievable. Not much on defense, but just so unbelievably versatile offensively. And again, big, 6'9".
Large man, yep, and can do everything. He can rebound the ball and dribble it up the court and make a perfect pass. He, again, fills in all of the gaps and also can be your primary scoring option on a team.
Bird, I would say most people would agree, top 10 all time.
Absolutely, yeah.
If not top 7, yeah.
One of the guys, too, the league is built upon his counterpart, Magic Johnson, is certainly probably right there with him in real life in terms of greatness of players of all time. But part of the gauntlet is that you're placing these players into the sandbox mode of basketball where your historical legacy, your accomplishments, all of these other things don't matter as much as can you dominate a game as it is sort of played today.
Number 3, 99 overall, Kobe Bryant. Unbelievable in 2K. I think the most recent one we have is NBA 2K24, and he's a big part of the game. They have these Kobe challenges where you relive some of his great moments and you play just as Kobe Bryant. However, they don't have a lot of his great moments on there. Like, they don't have his 81-point game. They don't have his final game against Utah where he scores 60. So I found that a little odd. Nevertheless, Kobe, very, very good in 2K. Absolute thief in the night with perimeter defense, could just rip the ball from you. Unbelievable scorer, can do it from everywhere. Can you feel the competitiveness, the Mamba mentality in the game?
Sure, you can feel it coming through. He soars through the air as well, like nobody's business. Can score from anywhere. Just just like he was in real life, a force to be reckoned with.
And now we come to the top 2, and the age-old debate that is also true in real life. Both these men are 99 overall, and frankly, my brother and I could not agree on which one should be first and which one should be second. My number 2 is LeBron James. My number 1 is Michael Jordan. Your number 1 is LeBron James. Your number 2 is Michael Jordan. Why do you think in 2K, I have to stress it, it's LeBron James better than Michael Jordan?
Well, if you strip away all of the myth-making around Jordan, the championships, the superstar status, you are left with a fantastic, excellent player. But let's not forget, Jordan's probably the main thing that people talk about is his ability to emotionally dominate a game. And as we've said, this is not something that applies in this video game world where the brains of these gentlemen are taking out and occasionally are controlled by our brains. In this case, if I am to pick a basketball simulation cyborg, I want LeBron James, a complete basketball player, huge, a freight train in the open court, able to knock down the occasional three 3-pointer. You want to make him your point guard? Fine. You want to run him as a small ball center? Okay. You want to play him any other position in between? That works too. 5 LeBron James defeats 5 of any other player in the Gauntlet if you could draft it that way.
Shit, you might have convinced me. Yeah, I don't know. Jordan, I mean, he's a guaranteed bucket. He's probably the most guaranteed bucket in NBA 2K. But you're, unbelievable perimeter defense, can play point guard, can play shooting guard. He has a lot of great attributes, but you might have sold me on ripping their brains out and putting our brains in. God, we're egomaniacal. Let's end this before they run us out on a rail.
Well, to defend Jordan, it's a guy who they literally rewrote these games for. They're like, we got to get Jordan into this game. And, he is a true force to be reckoned with. And if you can get into that, if you're watching The Last Dance and then you boot up 2K, maybe you can capture just a little bit of that ineffable essence that made the great one. As great as he was.
All right, well, let it be written in stone. Jordan number 2, LeBron number 1. Please subscribe, comment, and leave a rating. Send questions, comments, or big idea suggestions to our business email, flynnbrospod@gmail.com. Thank you to our producer, Will Slade, and we'll see you next time on the Flynn Brothers Podcast. Take care, buddy.
Take care.